Hello, I'm Allan Bonner. Famous executives are in jail. The economy is in a mess. Companies are failing. Diplomacy and politics can't seem to stop global terrorism. What's going on? Do we have the leaders we need? Do we need different leadership skills? At issue today is the nature of leadership. Let's also go back to the introduction I made to this program, and I basically said everything is all balled up in the public and the private sector and diplomacy and everywhere with the possible exception of the military. Is that true, Glenn, or am I just being alarmist?
Well, you're not being alarmist. It certainly is a significant problem that we're seeing right now, and I won't blame it on the economy. I just think people have given short shrift to the idea that leadership and leaders can be developed and taught. Even in the business schools, Alan, what you're going to find is that they concentrate on so many of the task skills and they leave the people skills alone. You know, there's an old adage that...
But hang on, they're not even good at the tasks. I mean, Enron was people who couldn't run a business properly. They were selling weather derivatives. The MBAs that were pulled right out of the MBA schools weren't even competent.
Well, having come from that environment, let me assure you that the issue of competence is a big one in terms of what we're generating out of our MBA schools and out of our universities right now. Our business schools have lost focus as well. Sid, you teach as well, and you may have something to add. I don't know.
Well, let me throw it to Sid in this way, and I'm not blaming you personally.
No, that's fine. No.
But I mean, there is something wrong with an educational system that in the past 30 years has been graduating Bachelor and Masters of Commerce and Business and Accounting at a great rate. I mean, you don't find people in industry with no post-secondary education the way you did in my father's generation, yet competence and excellence and even profitability has gone down the tubes in exact proportion to the amount of education we're giving people. Why is that?
That's first of all, it's a very good statement. And what I'm going to say to you is this, is that we actually have an education system, in my view, that's really founded on the more one remembers, the more one has learned, which is really not true. So your memory skills are good. So what happens is that the academic system actually sets itself up to, here's a textbook, read the textbook, regurgitate the textbook, rather than to think it through, see it through, what is it your real beliefs are. This is why today, in terms of the work that we're doing in particular, and Glenn in his own way and Richard in his own way, we now talk in terms of get rid of the leadership books. At the end of the day, it's about you becoming your own leadership guru. What is it you stand for anyways? Because people want to know. Are you trustworthy? Are you caring? Are you empathetic? Can you get something done? And you see, that is harder to teach because it's an intangible. And because you can't mark that, the academic institutions have some real trouble with all of that. This is why we're seeing quite literally, and I'm part of that movement, at the Schulich School of Business, because I teach the only executives there. Why is it? It's a different kind of 2-day, 3-day, 5-day program that makes a difference. It respects adult learning in terms of what they bring to the table.
What do you make, Richard, of the fact that studies have shown that business jargon now exceeds both academic and government jargon? You must see people coming into your center who are speaking in a language that you don't quite understand, and they use, I had a telemarketer on the phone this morning who was telling me about acronyms, and I said, what does that mean? She didn't know. I said, ask your manager to tell you what it is you're selling. Do you see this?
Good point. Well, I do, but then I sort of relate that to the color of my hair. And when my children and some younger people talk about MP3 players and downloads and that sort of thing, I just step back from that. In terms of the jargon that you're talking about, I try to translate things for my own self, and I ask questions to better understand what it is that people are talking about. And you're right, a lot of people hide behind jargon.
Quote from the Harvard Business Review, leaders thrash about with mission, vision, and value statements that are a boring stream of values and goals and aspirations, usually eliciting the response, true, but who cares? One other article says, leaders gather the troops around and dump a bucket of jargon on them. How do you fix that? That's somebody who is hiding, isn't it?
It is. It is somebody. You know, at the end of the day, we must be genuine and authentic. We're all quirky in our own ways. We all bring our own strengths and our talents, and we bring our passion in our own ways. You see, the effective leader really as an individual understands that they can be more than themselves because they surround themselves with talent. Interesting phenomenon that happens in organizations, and we're seeing this, actually we're seeing it because there is some corporate greed that is at play here as well, is that many senior leaders don't want to hire people who are actually better than them. They got to be the top dog, whatever you want to call it, whatever language you want to call it. But the really good leader says, wait a second here, I want people who are actually better than me. And when they are, we will achieve great things.
It's a very unusual attitude, wouldn't it be?
It is an unusual attitude. So, your whole point, do we need more leaders here in Canada? The answer is yes.
So now you're on to something. This is learning from adversity, including the lonely little boy Churchill off at his private school, Harrow, and his mummy wouldn't even answer his letters, and he wrote to her wanting to come home for Christmas and all this stuff. I mean, it's really tragic. That is said to be a crucible for leadership. But by the same token, the abuse that Stalin had as a child led him to be a despot, and the abuse that Hitler has as a child. So I assume this needs to be dished out in very, very accurate measures, because it can be a terrible tutor as well.
Well, it can be, and I wasn't really thinking of going that far into the dysfunctionality, but the adversity, trying something and not doing as well at it as what you had hoped that you would do. I know that I've certainly become a better leader, if you want, than what I was when I was younger, because I've had the blessing of being willing to make so many mistakes in life.
Sid, you want to jump in on this, I think.
Well, the whole notion of, you fail forward faster, and as long as if you're the school of hard knocks, you never graduate from that. And thank goodness there is a school of hard knocks for leaders, because leaders thrive on that. There isn't an instant textbook, only one source of information. It's all around us. Failure is actually a good thing. I'm going to say this, is that we're going through some tough times right now. We're going to see more good, solid, everyday leaders show up today than the charismatic, on TV, public figures. Where are they right now? They're hiding. Why? Because they don't have answers to the questions. But you know who does? Those that have failed forward, understand that we're moving forward.
Glenn, you're on side with the adversity school?
I am, and the nature of a high-achieving leader is a spotty academic record, which is interesting.
Oh, great!
Yeah, well, there's hope. Yeah, I keep telling parents when the kid comes home with a failure, give them extra money, because as long as they turn it around, just going for straight A's just tells me that they're a very conventional little student doing what the teacher wants.
I'm a little old to get you to write a letter to my parents. Gentlemen, level 5 leadership. There's this guy, Jim Collins. You don't have to have read all his stuff, but he says humility is the place to go to really realize your potential. Now, TV hosts aren't really too much in favor of humility.
We've noticed.
I'll be happy to. Thank you. I work alone. But would you talk about that? Because we think of leaders sometimes as swashbuckling, cigar-chomping know-it-alls who intimidate people. But what's with this humility that Collins is talking about?
Well, I think he's really talking about Greenleaf's idea around servant leaders. And in my very brief understanding of his work, it really is putting yourself in the other person's shoes. I suppose you went back to the Bible and you looked at the Golden Rule. You're often talking about those sorts of issues with leaders. You asked me who was the favorite leader. I mentioned someone named Bjorn Bailey. Bjorn Bailey was the president of IKEA Corporation, and we know the success that IKEA is. But they had one primary goal in operating, and Bailey used to say it all the time: freedom and responsibility. That's what I want my people to have.
Every time I go in that great store, I kick myself for being a Canadian and say, we produce office furniture in this country. We have trees in this country. We know how to saw them up in this country. Why aren't we the IKEA to the world? Tell me that.
Well, they actually source in Canada that sort of goods. If you're talking about IKEA itself, they have local sourcing. That's part of their success.
But why aren't they Canea stores all over the world?
We tried with a Domo, but I don't know how that did. Yeah.
All right, the other thing Jim Collins talks about, and it doesn't matter who the author is, but he talks about leaders who look out the window for the explanation to their problems or in the mirror, meaning a lot of people blaming other people for what goes wrong. Thoughts on that, Sid?
Well, I think it's situational. There's times when you got to look in the mirror, and there's times you got to look out. At this stage of the game, quite frankly, now that we're in the kind of environment that we're in, I think looking out and talking to the front line and getting out of the bunker and into the action is where one needs to be. The danger is today is for people to start to retrench and think that they can get into a room, kick some ideas around, come up with a strategy. Well, at the end of the day, people don't know what that strategy's for or what it will do. So, looking in the mirror is one thing, but right at the moment, I'm going to say this, it's about getting out right now, finding out what's real, what's needed.
I've got to tell you, I'm a little slow on the take-up, and I've arrived at this late in the program before I realized that what we have is 4 white guys sitting around the table talking about leadership, and we are locked into our Western Enlightenment intellectual tradition. There are other traditions in China and India that are based more on hierarchy or on team or on other things. Can we get out of this Western box for a minute and talk about what leadership means in other cultures, Glenn?
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. Sid will be able to follow on this as well. I've spent the last 5 or 6 years in the Middle East, and that culture tends to be quite different, although they are doing the exact sort of leadership training that we're doing here. One of the problems, and it has to do with looking in the mirror, is that these folks often have a great problem with 360-degree feedback. In other words, asking someone to rate them. They'll answer their own questionnaire, but when it comes to others, the data comes very positively. And I said, well, why are these people being perceived so positively when they're kind of a disaster as a leader or a manager? The point is, well, culturally, we don't say anything bad about people at a higher level or a hierarchy. And we saw that, and we had to adjust our surveys and our research to cover that.
Hey, it gets worse. I've been to institutions in England where some of the attendees from other cultures say, if I don't go home with a certificate of attendance, I could be killed. And they jig up a certificate of attendance, not a diploma or a degree. That's tough stuff.
Yes, well, there is a penchant for degrees and for recognition for any sort of education. That is, especially in Africa when I did work there, and said you've done India and China.
Absolutely. Just to address the question itself, are there some differences? The answer is absolutely there are. In China's an interesting phenomenon because when I was there this past June, talking to a whole group of senior executives, and one of the things that they recognize is that they live by the Confucian mentality. And the Confucian mentality basically goes like this: one must serve before one can lead. And the leaders know that unless they break that cycle, they really can't go global as much as they'd really like to go global. So they got to break that pattern. They understand that. There's a research project called the Globe Research Project, and there's 170 researchers over the past 11 years have actually been identifying both regional, and you talk about 4 white guys around the table, you're absolutely right, but they identified 22 attributes that were universal regardless of the culture. They identified 35, I believe is the number, that had some regional context to it. So for example, you mentioned being humble or humility. That actually doesn't play well in the Middle East at all. It plays well in North America, but it does not play well in the Middle East. Sincerity will play well in China, but it won't necessarily play well, again, in the Middle East or even in the UK for that matter. So there are some cultural differences, but interesting, there is a core that's absolutely the same.
Now, I sat with an executive the other day, he had 3 BlackBerries, a cell phone, and I don't know what other gizmos in front of him. I am reminded that Peter Drucker, the management guru, said the British ran India with barefoot runners and quill pens. Are we too locked into technology?
Well, it's part of our culture right now. I don't know if we're too locked into it or not, but it's...
Does the leader distance
I
himself?
think they have to be able to use it.
Does the leader, though, is it a great tool in the leader's hands, or does the leader distance himself from the team and those being led? Sid?
You know, this is a fascinating topic because quite literally what we're seeing is that we're getting, what's building into our system is the belief that the leader is all-knowing, all-being. And that's a huge danger. There's absolutely no way one single person on this planet with 4 BlackBerries, 10 BlackBerries, I don't care how many there are, that they can actually be in touch with what's going on. They just can't do it. However, we're starting to believe that, oh man, this busyness is really a mark of good leadership. What a crock that happens to be.
We only have a minute and a half or so, but there's one more thing, and that is the Generation Y, and even to a certain extent Generation X before them, educational methodology that focused on teamwork, on feeling good, on positive reinforcement, on you're a great kid. Tell me, if you wish, does that have present difficulties or opportunities or what, Glenn?
I think Generation Y, and to some degree Generation X, are more attuned to a team-based leadership approach. Our generation, which may be somewhere the boomers, would be much more top-down oriented and probably, in our own minds, harder workers. I used to use the expression, is what's happening here in the university? Am I getting older, or are these people becoming intellectually lazy? It's the mechanism by which they're working. Women in leadership roles, for example. He's talked about 4 white guys around here. Our research would indicate we're seeing not much significant difference between the style tendencies and the typologies between a woman leader, a top woman leader, and a top man leader.
Sid, though, in 10 seconds, is Generation Y as productive, or are they coddled?
I think the Generation Y is the scary smart generation. We better learn how to tap into their potential because they want a learning environment. They are so inquisitive, so hungry, it's unbelievable.
They're also your potential clients, so it's good to say something nice about them.
It may very well be, but I am going to say this. I really think they represent a huge opportunity for every organization.
See you next time.